It began with a silence so thick it felt like the walls of Windsor themselves were holding their breath. King Charles stood at the center of the chamber, shoulders slightly curved, fingers trembling against the polished surface of the council table. Senior advisors watched in rigid anticipation, their eyes darting between the king and the Queen Consort seated just feet away. Camilla expected this meeting to reinforce her role, to secure her influence, to confirm that the shifting winds of public sentiment were just noise. But the truth Charles was about to speak would strike like lightning, splitting the monarchy open at its core. For weeks, the king had been crumbling under the weight of crises he could no longer cushion. Scandals were rising like tides, diplomatic embarrassments were growing more public, and behind palace walls, whispers of instability were turning into full-blown warnings. And through all of it, Catherine's name, quiet, steady, unassuming, kept resurfacing in private discussions, in advisor briefings, in the murmurs of foreign dignitaries who trusted her calm instinct more than official protocols. Charles had heard these whispers, tried to push them aside, tried to believe that the structure he had built would hold. But tonight, he could no longer ignore the truth tightening around him. Camilla's jaw set in a rigid line as Charles tried to speak. Her expression held confidence, expectation, authority, until suddenly it didn't. The king's voice cracked, barely audible, as he finally whispered the sentence that would unravel everything. The monarchy needs her. The room went still, every advisor frozen in disbelief. Not a single eye flicked toward Camilla, not a single person questioned who her was. They all knew. The words didn't just hang in the air, they cut through it. Catherine was no longer just popular, she was essential, she was stability, she was the crown's last anchor in a storm that refused to break. Camilla leaned back slowly, her confidence evaporating in real time. She searched the king's face for explanation, for correction, for anything that might soften the blow. But Charles never turned toward her. He didn't say her name. He didn't reassure her. He simply stared ahead, broken by a realization he had tried to deny for months, that the monarchy could not survive on titles. It needed trust, and the one woman who held that trust wasn't sitting beside him. It was Catherine, miles away, unaware that her entire destiny had just shifted without her presence. Behind the advisor's composed expressions, a storm of understanding erupted. This wasn't drama. This wasn't emotion. This was a tectonic shift at the heart of the crown. And before we go deeper into the scandal, the fallout, and the secret protocol that made this moment possible, make sure you hit subscribe right now, because the next chapter in this royal meltdown is even more explosive than what you've heard so far. What triggered such a seismic confession from the king wasn't a single event, but a buildup of fractures spreading through the monarchy like cracks in stained glass. Behind the polished ceremonies and carefully staged photo ops, tensions had been simmering for months, hidden from the public but impossible for insiders to ignore. The decline wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle, delicate, creeping under doors and through hallways like a cold draft the palace staff couldn't shut out. Charles felt every shift, every murmur, every unspoken warning. And at the center of those whispers was one truth. Catherine was quietly becoming the monarchy's unshakable axis. While Camilla fought battles behind velvet curtains, arguments over patronages, missteps at diplomatic events, clashes with staff, Catherine was doing something far more dangerous to her rivals. She was earning trust. Not through grand gestures or lavish displays, but through a steady, consistent presence that made people feel anchored. Every time she stepped into a room, tension eased. Every time she spoke, advisors listened. Every time she intervened, calmly, discreetly, crises softened before they ignited. Foreign officials noticed it first, a subtle protocol correction here, a diplomatic rescue there. Catherine's interventions never made headlines because she didn't allow them to. But the people who mattered, the people who influenced nations, saw her precision. Some even began requesting private meetings with her, a fact quietly noted by the Foreign Office. She wasn't just admired, she was becoming indispensable. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, Camilla's influence was slipping through her fingers. Meetings she once commanded now occurred without her. Briefings she expected to receive were redirected. Patronage rotations quietly shifted. At first, she thought it was error, then coincidence, then sabotage. But the truth was far simpler. The monarchy had begun to reorganize itself around the person who actually held the public's trust. And that person was Catherine. Memories of Queen Elizabeth lingered in every corridor, and people, consciously or not, looked for her echo. In Catherine, they found glimmers of the restraint, the discipline, the quiet strength they feared had disappeared. Polls reflected the same truth. As Camilla's numbers declined under pressure, Catherine's soared to heights not seen since the late Queen herself. But trust alone wasn't what changed the course of royal history. Something far more deliberate had been set in motion, long before Charles whispered those 6 words that shattered Camilla's standing. The secret began with Anne. Catherine's rise wasn't accidental. It was prepared, shaped, mentored. While the world obsessed over tiaras and fashion, Princess Anne and Catherine were building something far more powerful behind closed doors. A quiet framework of continuity, a contingency plan the monarchy hoped would never be needed. But as scandals mounted and Camilla's failures stacked one after another, the plan that had been sealed away was quietly pulled from the archives. It would become the reason Charles finally broke. The atmosphere inside Windsor had shifted, subtle but impossible to ignore. Courtiers who once walked with clipped confidence now moved with the hesitancy of people waiting for a storm they could feel but couldn't see. Whispers curled through the corridors like smoke, carrying the same name over and over, Catherine. Because no matter how hard the firm tried to present unity, everyone knew the truth. Without her, the monarchy's facade was peeling faster than anyone dared admit. Behind closed doors, senior aides spoke in coded phrases: stability concerns, public sentiment, the succession narrative. But strip away the diplomatic language and one brutal reality remained. The people had chosen their queen, and it wasn't the one wearing the crown. It was the one fighting for her life while the palace scrambled to keep the walls from collapsing. And this is exactly why Prince Philip's brother's private words, uttered on a weakening breath, had detonated through the entire institution. In a family that values silence more than truth, his confession was nothing short of treason, and yet it was the only honest sentence anyone in that dynasty had spoken in years. Catherine is the only real queen we have left. The line struck like lightning, illuminating everything the firm hoped to keep hidden. Inside the senior royal circle, panic took on a strange shape. Some pressed to bury the statement, fearing the public would see it as yet another sign of deep fracture. Others believed suppressing it would be far worse, but William, he stayed quiet, too quiet. Those closest to him insisted it wasn't indifference, it was fury held under the weight of responsibility, because he knew exactly what his great-uncle had meant. Philip's generation was built on resilience, duty, steadiness, and Catherine embodied every one of those qualities with a grace the rest of the institution had long abandoned. But the outside world didn't wait for internal agreement. The moment the quote leaked, anonymously of course, it exploded. Social platforms lit up with declarations of loyalty to Catherine. Hashtags, tributes, video montages, timelines filled with photos of her comforting children, greeting crowds, walking through pain with quiet strength. It wasn't just sympathy, it was allegiance, the kind monarchs dream of but rarely earn. And while the palace insisted they were handling the matter internally, insiders revealed a different truth. The statement had fundamentally changed the succession atmosphere. Advisors were suddenly calculating Catherine's influence, her public love, her symbolic power. It was no longer about titles, it was about legitimacy, and that terrified the ones who depended on ceremony instead of character. The firm had spent years trying to control narratives, silence scandals, and manage optics, but for the first time in decades, a narrative slipped free of their grip, one born not of PR, but of genuine loyalty. A dying man's final truth had become a rallying cry. And before we move on, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because the next section exposes the internal meeting that left senior royals in absolute shock, and you do not want to miss what happened behind that locked door. The meeting was called with almost no notice, a rarity in a palace where calendars are usually planned down to the minute. Senior aides rushed through stone corridors, their steps echoing like distant thunder as they gathered in the old strategy room, an oak-paneled chamber once used by monarchs during wartime. That alone told everyone this wasn't routine. This was crisis. When William walked in, the room went silent, not because he demanded it, but because the weight of the moment settled on every shoulder. They had all seen the public reaction to Philip's brother's final words. They had all read the headlines. They had all watched the outpouring for Catherine. Yet nobody dared speak first. The tension felt like glass, thin, sharp, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. The first voice came from an older advisor, one who had served under the Queen Mother. His tone was grave, almost apologetic. "Sir, public sentiment has intensified. The statement," he hesitated, "has taken on a life of its own." He didn't have to explain. Everyone understood. The palace had lost the narrative. Another advisor pushed forward stacks of reports, graphs, projections, public responses. But William didn't look down. He already knew. He had spent the entire night reading messages from people across the Commonwealth, messages begging for updates, sending prayers, calling Catherine their queen in everything but title. This wasn't a trend, it was a shift, a permanent one. But the shock of the meeting came when a senior communications officer, normally cautious to a fault, spoke plainly. "We can't suppress this. The people don't want the monarchy we've been presenting. They want the monarchy she represents." And in that moment, the silence returned, heavier than before. Because for the first time, someone in that room had said it out loud. Another aide, more traditionalist and visibly shaken, warned that allowing Catherine to become the symbolic center of the firm could destabilize protocol, tradition, hierarchy. But even he struggled to push the old arguments. The reality had outgrown them. Catherine wasn't trending. Catherine was transforming the monarchy simply by existing within it. And then William finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "The people trust her. They always have." A pause. "And they always will." For a man who rarely showed emotion in official settings, his expression revealed more than any speech could. This was not strategy. This was truth. This was a husband who knew that without Catherine, the entire institution would fracture into dust. Behind him, a young aide added quietly, "Her strength is the monarchy's last anchor." It was a dangerous admission, but nobody disagreed. Even the staunchest traditionalists knew the firm had misread the moment. Catherine wasn't just beloved, she was essential. The meeting ended with no final decision, no statement drafted, no strategy agreed upon, because deep down, they all knew something irreversible had happened. The monarchy's future now depended on one woman the public had already crowned in their hearts. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because Section 5 reveals the secret family intervention that forced the palace into action. The intervention didn't come from advisors, strategists, or council members. It came from the only people Catherine trusted more than the crown itself, her own family. While the palace scrambled behind closed doors, the Middletons quietly arrived at Windsor in a pair of unmarked cars, escorted through a side entrance typically reserved for emergencies, and in many ways this was one. Because they, more than anyone, understood the toll the last months had taken on Catherine, physically, emotionally, and now publicly. Carol was the first to step inside. Calm, composed, but with that fierce protectiveness only a mother possesses. She had watched her daughter weather storms no ordinary woman could survive. She had seen her smile through pressure that would crush most, and seeing her now, fragile but still holding herself with royal grace, ignited something powerful. She didn't need palace permission to speak. She didn't need a briefing. She simply went to her daughter, took her hand, and reminded her, "You don't owe them your soul, darling." Michael Middleton, usually quiet and measured, stood behind them with a rare sternness. He had tolerated the spotlight, he had tolerated the noise, but watching the institution lean on Catherine while failing to protect her, it had crossed a line. And in a voice far stronger than anyone expected, he said, "Enough is enough." Even palace staff took a step back. The Middletons weren't guests today. They were the only shield Catherine had left. Charlotte entered next, her small footsteps echoing in the hallway like a gentle reminder of the future everyone seemed to be forgetting. She ran straight into Catherine's arms, holding her mother with the kind of love that cuts through politics, power, and public scandal. And in that embrace, Catherine's composure cracked, just for a moment, because the truth was undeniable. She wasn't fighting for a throne, she was fighting for her family. William watched from a distance at first, letting Catherine have that moment. He had been carrying the weight of two worlds, his duty and his love, and the collision was finally catching up with him. When he walked toward them, his expression softened in a way that only those closest to him ever witnessed. "We're done playing defense," he said quietly. "They can't use you to save the monarchy and break you at the same time." It was then that Carol turned to him with a firmness even the future king didn't challenge. "If you want her to stand with the crown must finally stand with her." And that sentence changed the entire direction of the royal crisis. Because for the first time, the palace wasn't deciding Catherine's fate. Her family was. Her husband was. And Catherine, exhausted, adored, and newly empowered, finally realized she didn't need approval to reclaim her narrative. She already had the support that mattered most. The firm could either protect her or lose her. Before we continue, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because what happens in the next chapter changes the monarchy forever.